in massive MIMO systems. I'm Sudarshan Mukherjee from IIT Guwahati, and this is based on one of my works that was published recently in previous year. So the first topic, if we want to talk about this area that comes in mind, is what exactly is edge computing. So before we move on to edge computing, let us talk a little bit about the vision for 5G. When the International Telecommunication Union first publicized IMT 2020 as a vision for the key performance requirements in 5G, they especially specified three directions for key performance indicators requirements. One is spectral efficiency, the second is energy efficiency, and the third one is latency. The spectral efficiency, it essentially means the amount of information bits that you can transmit over a unit bandwidth per unit second of time. So as per Vision 5G, it was recognized to be or at least 10 to 100 times higher than the current 4th generation standards. The energy efficiency requirement obviously was supposed to be get improved as well, and it was said to be at least 10 times less compared to what is required for the 4th generation wireless networks. Similar criteria was set for the latency requirements. Latency in essence it represents the amount of time that is required for a round trip communication. Now, when the 5G came together over the past few years, it was found out that in order to satisfy these various key performance indicator requirements, several enabling technologies needed to be introduced. These technologies ranged from massive MIMO systems, which introduced a large-scale antenna arrays at the base stations, millimeter wave transmissions, which introduced millimeter wave range of communications, ultra densification of the cellular networks, which essentially involves deploying a large number of cellular base stations within a small network area. And of course, there is the device to device or machine to machine communications. All these different enabling technologies were there to not only to successfully achieve the various KPI requirements for 5G, but also as a support or backbone for the various innovative and smart services and applications that were required or that were expected for the Vision 5G. Like, for example, if we consider virtual augmented reality or e-health monitoring or different forms of wireless networking, wireless network formed by various wireless devices in our day-to-day lives, like which is those type of networks which are summarily known as Internet of Things, or smart card, smart grid, smart city, all these different projects. All of these innovative and smart services, they have one thing in common, and that is they require a computation of very large number of raw data. And as we know that our end-to-end devices that we carry on us every day, or the devices that are wirelessly communicating with the network in our homes, they are not exactly equipped to process this huge or humongous amount of raw data, because they specialize in portability and mobility, and small amount of work. So edge computing or off-device processing of data became a important support for different types of smart applications. So when we look at 5G, it essentially aims at integrating three different areas of wireless network through network flexibility. There is existing cellular network or heterogeneous network structure. There is different new enabling technologies and the innovative smart supports for different smart services. So as a whole, these innovative smart services, they introduce a new form of architecture in the 5G networks. And this new architecture is known as the cloudified architecture and application scenarios. So overall, if we want to talk about what is an edge computing, we can in short say that it is a sort of cloud computing, but at the network edges. The cloud computing, it was introduced with Cloud RAN type networks, where the data processing could take place at the edge compute at the large server that is placed at the macro base stations, and different devices which are in the neighborhood of the macro base station could offload those raw data for processing. But with the introduction of edge computing, we bring those network cloud servers from the center of the cellular network, or at the macro base stations, to the network access points at the edges. So it is essentially placement of a data center grade network or computer storage service closer to the various endpoint devices, so as to improve the service capability of the network while complying with the data locality, cost optimization, and latency reduction. If we look at from these different if we look at from these perspectives of edge computing, what we see that edge computing it follows a few characteristics. The first one, as we mentioned, is end user proximity, which essentially means that each of the end devices will have a very low service latency, which, which essentially refers to the real-time optimized infrastructure and a rapid response from the network. There is, of course, the contextualized information awareness, which essentially refers to the various contextualized services and improves the quality of service experience. For example, we can refer to the automated traffic control or e-health monitoring, smart grid monitoring, various surveillance applications, or virtual augmented realities and the IoT sensor networks, etc. There is also the case of real-time network access, which essentially results in an efficient utilization of various computing and communication resources. And of course, it also refers to having massive data storage services near the network edges at the access points, and provides more portability to the end user at the same time. And the final benefit of edge computing characteristics is that we can have an intelligent or smart access and service, which essentially points towards an enhanced security and privacy of the network. With these characteristics in mind, let us now explore the different types of edge computing. If we look at from the perspective, if we look at from the perspective of computation or signal or data processing scenario, there are two types of computing that can be possible in the edge computing. There is the partial data processing scenario, where the end device it owns its own set of data processing architecture and has sufficient memory for processing the data, and it can offload only a part of the raw data to the network or to the edge server for processing. Or it can be complete binary processing, where the end user can choose between whether to offload the data or not. And if it chooses to offload the data, it will offload the entire data set to the server for processing, and then receive the processed data, which is a very small amount of data, to execute the necessary actions. On the other hand, if we look at the implementation aspects of the edge computing scenarios, we see that there are three different architectural aspects from the perspective of implementation. There is fog computing, which promotes use of heterogeneous data centers. It doesn't matter what type of network node we are accessing, as long as the network node has its own server for processing the data, we can use it as a data center. In this way, in fog computing, whether it is router or network switches or network access points, each of them are capable of becoming a data center. On the other hand, mobile or multi-access edge computing promotes a more traditional type of scenario for edge computing, where the data centers are placed at the radio access points or the base stations. And finally, there is cloud-led computing, where it can be some essentially said to be a data center in a box with a virtual machine, which essentially means that even a small wireless device which has sufficient memory and processing power can be taken to be a virtual device for serving any nearby user as a data center. There are various open source projects that are actively working in providing edge computing services. Of them, there are some Linux-based services. Some of them are iOS-based services. Some of them are here I have listed. One of them is Acrino, Ajax, Chord, and IOFOG, and CubeEdge. So if we summarize, we can say that edge computing is an on-demand collaborative service where all the different base stations or the MSC servers, they share a collaborative space.
Hello, sir.
And yes?
Sir, once again you repeat, sir, that edge computing.
Which part?
That edge computing part, sir.
Yeah, okay. The types of edge computing?
That types, previous one, sir. Yes, sir, this one only.
Okay. This here, what I've tried to do is to summarize the different characteristics and advantages that we can obtain from edge computing. The first advantage is that there is end user proximity, which essentially means that the distance between the edge server and the end user device which wants to offload some data for offsite processing is very small, which essentially leads to a very small communication latency. And so the service latency will be essentially very small. And this essentially leads to a very real-time optimized infrastructure, which is specialized for rapid response. There is contextualized information awareness, which essentially means that for different types of applications, there will be a certain level of awareness present in the service provider or the server, which will process the data in the same in a slightly different manner, whether it is in terms of processing speed or priority. This will essentially lead to an improved quality of service experience. For example, if we are talking about automated traffic control, it essentially needs to process a huge amount of data fast and at the same time so as to avoid accident or traffic congestion. There is also e-health monitoring, which needs to process large amount of data to monitor the health of a patient. So the priority of different events for each of these cases will be different. There is also smart grid applications, surveillance, and virtual augmented reality for gaming or for any conference meeting. There is IoT sensor networks, and all these different applications, they require contextual awareness at the server. There is also real-time network access, which is required for efficient utilization of communication and computing resources. And it essentially means that at any point of time, a mobile user can access the network to retrieve some amount of data from the network or to store some data in the network server, or it may be offloading some amount of data for processing. So all of these can be done because of the presence of a massive data storage at each of these servers while the user is mobile. Of course, it also has to be done in an intelligent or smart manner so that we can provide enhanced security and privacy for each of these end users.
Oh, okay, thank you, sir.
Yep. As I was saying that if we are talking about edge computing as a whole, in a nutshell, we can say that it is a on-demand collaborative service which essentially shares a collaborative cloud space among the multiple access points or multiple edge computing servers, and all of these servers, they upload their data to the cloud space. They individually process those data, or the offload part of the data to the actual cloud center for joint processing, and then those processed data is sent to different sensory nodes for actual execution of some work. In this way, the entire 5G network or entire evolution of 5G services, from whether it's from IoT devices to the cloud server, can be categorized into three strata. At the lowest stratum, there are various end user devices, which can also be said to be the IoT devices. And these devices, they are in direct communication with the stratum for edge computing, which is divided into three categories: cloudlets computing, fog computing, and mobile edge computing. And above these three types of edge computing, there is of course the massive cloud data center, which is placed at the macro base station. So in this way, we have a hierarchical organization of the entire edge computing process. Now that we have introduced the what an edge computing process is or how it works, let us look at the actual topic or what we are going to address today. This particular work, its title is Edge Computing Enabled Cell-Free Massive MIMO Systems. It was published in IEEE Transactions on Wireless Communications in 2020. The only prerequisite for this work, for understanding this work, is to have a basic understanding of how a wireless communication system works and understanding of the cell-free massive MIMO systems. If we talk contribution wise, then this work it considers a load-based edge server allocation for computing in cell-free massive MIMO systems. We also analyze here the computation time distributions with multi-server cooperations and analyze the latency energy trade-off for the system design requirements if we want to deploy edge computing in cell-free massive MIMO. With this in mind, I have divided the entire topic, or I have outlined it into three distinct phases. The first phase, in the first phase, we shall discuss the wireless channel and diversity. The second phase, we'll discuss the MIMO channel and how we can scale up the MIMO systems. And finally, in the last phase, we'll discuss the actual research work, which was carried out in the edge computing enabled cell-free massive MIMO. Let us first talk about wireless channel and diversity. If I look at the history of wireless communications, we can say that there are many pioneers that have appeared over the past century that have contributed enormously to the development of wireless communication systems. However, I would like to mention three of these pioneers. The first and foremost pioneer is Acharya Jagadish Chandra Bose, who demonstrated the millimeter wave communications in 1894. For this particular purpose, he developed his own corresponding instruments for millimeter wave transmissions and proved that wireless transmission is a feasible, or it is an opportunity for us to perform long range communications. Of course, at that point of time, because of various socio-political implications, his works were not that highly publicized, which led to the only pioneer who was recognized at that time being Marconi, who actually commercialized the telecommunication technology for long-range communications. Later, of course, there are many experts on wireless communications emerged, but last but not the least, we should always mention Claude Shannon, who is the pioneer of the modern day information theoretic treatment of wireless communications. Shannon's pioneering work on the information theoretic view for the study and development of wireless communication has brought wireless systems to its current phase of development. If we want, with this introduction or with this look back at the history, let us look at what actually wireless channel is or how it works. So if we want to talk about wireless channel, we should go back and look at how wave propagation works. If you remember, when we were in class 2 level, when we were studying class 2 level physics, we have studied how wave propagation works in any medium. From a source, the wave propagates in a circular wavefront, and whenever it encounters a obstacle in its path, that obstacle, it reflects part of the wave energy and thus becoming a secondary source for the wavefront. So when it reaches at the receiver receives the primary wavefront as well as the secondary wavefront simultaneously, resulting in an interference of the wave at the receiving end. In wireless channel, there are multiple obstructions that are present. These obstructions can be very large, which are of physical, very large and present in nature. For example, they can be large trees, mountains, buildings, buildings in the urban areas, various cars, etc. And at the same time, there are also various particles that are present in the air or water molecules that are responsible for causing reflection or refraction or absorbing part of the electromagnetic wave that is being transmitted. In this way, whenever we are transmitting a signal from one transmitter to a receiver, multiple copies of the same signal are transmitted through different paths and get superposed at the receiving end. And the result is that sometimes those signals. Yes?
இனி எத்தனை கம்பெனி இருந்தாலும் எல்லாரும் இதைத்தான் சொல்ல போறானுங்க. இவ்வளவு கஷ்டத்துலயும் இந்த கடன் தேவைதானா? அர்ச்சனா சொன்னதுல எதுவும் தப்பு இல்லடா.
Hello.
இருக்கிற சுமையை அவன்.
Hello. Yep. So.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, the participants are requested to keep their mic in off mode or mute mode. So if they have any questions, they can put in conversation or WhatsApp group. So at the end of this session, we'll discuss. Thank you, sir. Please, sir. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, sure.
Please, sir, you can carry on.
So what I was saying is that whenever we talk about wireless communication, there are multiple copies of the same signal that are traveling through different paths from the transmitter to the receiver and superposing at the receiving end. And this superposition, it may result in either constructive interference or constructive or destructive interference, which will either amplify the received signal or completely eliminate the received signal power. Here I have shown a plot of the wireless plot of the impulse response for the wireless channel, and as you can see that the fluctuation of the received signal power can be as large as 35 dB in any general wireless communication environment. Of course, the noise in wireless channel is assumed to be the traditional additive white Gaussian noise, which we are very familiar with from our study in digital communications. So what we see here is that if we want to understand the performance of a wireless channel, the statistics of the channel gain is very important to measure what average performance the wireless channel can deliver to us. From this perspective, we can study in a single transmission antenna and single receive antenna scenario where the wireless channel is present between them, and through multiple paths, the signal is received at the receiver. Of course, there are two types of propagation link that can be available that can occur in wireless communications. One case is that there is a direct link between the transmitter and receiver, which is usually the case only when the distance between the transmitter and receivers are relatively small. But when we are talking about long distance communication, such scenario rarely occurs. So we'll primarily focus on the non-line of sight scenario where there is no direct link between the transmitter and the receiver. Under this condition, the wireless channel envelope that we receive is usually assumed to be Rayleigh distributed, which essentially means that the individual channel gains can be in the baseband communication can be treated to be a complex normal distributed random variable. For this particular type of scenario, if we study the bit error performance of a simple binary phase shift keying type modulation, what we'll see that the overall probability of error is the average of the original probability of error for the BPSK in AWGN channel with only a slight modification where a term mod h square comes in the picture at the receiving end. Because mod h square, it becomes part of the received signal to noise ratio, and this h depends on the Rayleigh distributed channel. So if we take out the use the Rayleigh distribution as the PDF or probability density function, then this averaging results in a more concrete form of the probability of error, which essentially leads to a expression of 1/4 SNR. This essentially means that instead of having an exponential decay in probability of error with increasing signal to noise ratio, as we observed in AWGN channel, will have more of a linear decrease in the probability of error, which essentially means that if you are talking about a wireless channel with Rayleigh fading when compared to the AWGN channel, the actual performance of BPSK transmission is much worse. And this loss in performance is the result of the channel being in deep fade. So the question comes that since we cannot have a reliable channel, can we use this unreliability to our advantage? The answer is yes. We can use opportunistic communication scenarios or strategies to exploit this unreliability towards our advantage. And one of the prime examples of such application is diversity. How diversity works then? So the idea of diversity is to ensure that the signal transmitted from the transmitter to the receiver actually passes through multiple independent paths with independent fading coefficients, which essentially leads us to specialized combining of these received signal at the receiver so as to improve the reliability of the communications. As we know that there are three main distinct resources that are available in any communication system: time, space, and frequency. So the diversity can be applicable in all these three different aspects. If we talk about the diversity in time, there is repetition coding or the rotation codes, where we actually transmit the same signal or a rotated version of the signal repeatedly through multiple instances of time. Similar thing can be achieved in frequency but through space spectrum, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. And of course, there is space or antenna diversity, which is the main topic of our discussion, where we deploy multiple antennas at the base stations or at the receiver to receive multiple copies of the signal. Since the main topic of our discussion is centered towards the space diversity, I'm just going to introduce one type of frequency diversity and time diversity, and then focus our entire discussion on the space diversity. Frequency diversity, the most popular application is WaveDM. So in WaveDM, we generate the signal in the frequency domain, then convert it in the time domain and add some cyclic prefix and transmit it over the channel. At the receiving end, we remove the cyclic prefix and then convert it back to the frequency domain. The whole point of applying the cyclic prefix is to adjust the signal in such a way that the presence of frequency selective nature of the fading does not affect the transmitted signal. On the other hand, if we look at the time diversity, a more practical example can be given in the form of Global Systems for Mobile Communication, that is GSM. It is a digital cellular standard that we are all familiar with, and it was developed in Europe in 1980s. It is a frequency division duplex transmission system, which uses separate bands for uplink and downlink, and each band is divided into multiple sub channels, which are shared by the users. And to implement time diversity in GSM, what it is done is actually we divide the audio signal into multiple frames, and each of these frames have multiple slots dedicated for individual users. And what it has been observed that in GSM, roughly every 2 frame, each user can transmit their signal once. So in this way, in each frame, we contain interleaved data from 8 users into different time slots. And in this way, since we are transmitting the data from in multiple time slots, same copy of data in the multiple time slots will end up with time diversity in GSM. Now that we have a rough idea of what goes on in time diversity, let us see what are the practical drawbacks that has led us to the consideration of space diversity. The first and primary drawback that we face with time diversity is that it requires us to interleave or code the data that needs to be transmitted over several coherence intervals, which essentially means that over a long period of time, we can transmit a very small amount of data, and therefore it is not very suitable for communication systems which has severe latency constraints. Of course, since we are repeating the same signal over time, there is also a loss of power. There is also loss of power or energy or excessive energy consumption, which we cannot account for. Similar problems can also arise in the frequency diversity scenario. The solution that was offered was to introduce space or antenna diversity, where we implement multiple antennas at the transmitter or at the receiving end, and each of these antennas simultaneously receive multiple copies of the same signal for processing, which alleviates the problem of dedicating additional time or frequency resource for transmitting copies of the same signal. There are two different aspects of space diversity, two different types of space diversity. Transmitter diversity, where the channel knowledge is required at the transmitter and it deploys multiple antennas at the transmitting end. And there is receiver diversity, where the receiver deploys multiple antennas and requires knowledge of the wireless channel at the receiving end. Let us first talk about the receiver diversity. Here, I have presented a small diagram of a very commonly known receiver diversity scenario, where we have a single transmitting antenna, and there is a set of receiving antenna at the receiving end. So there are L antennas at the receiver, and there is only one antenna at the transmitter. So here what we have observed is that each of these antennas, we are assuming that they have independent paths, which means these paths, they do not interfere with each other. And at the receiving end, we are obtaining a different receive vector, a different receive signal for each of these antennas. So for the LF antenna, the receive signal will be given as simple as this, where we multiply with the channel gain HLM and the mth time instance, and the transmitted signal is XM, and there is of course the AWGN noise or identified Gaussian noise WLM. In this way, we obtain a receive signal vector Y, which is simply equal to Hx plus W, where H is the channel vector, which consists of the channel for each of these independent channels between the transmitter and the receiver. Since we are normally considering baseband transmission, we will consider the we will consider the channel noise or AWGN noise to be also complex normal distributed AWGN noise, which is zero mean and circular symmetric in nature, and has individual variance for each channel to be equal at sigma square. Now, if we consider the receive signal processing, since we have received a signal vector, we need to process the data from each of these antennas. So we need a receiver combining vector, which we have denoted here as G, and the essential decoded signal will be summarily given as G Hermitian I, which is a simple mathematical operation of Hermitian, that is the complex conjugate operation, and it will give us G Hermitian Hx plus G Hermitian W. So what we see is that G Hermitian H multiplied with X is essentially the received signal that we get, which needs to be mapped into the actual transmitted modulation symbols. And G Hermitian W is the receiver, is the decoded output noise. So if we want to compute the received SNR of this particular transmission scheme, what we see is that we have the expectation of norm of G Hermitian Hx whole square, which is essentially the average value of the received signal power divided by average value of the processed noise power. So in the numerator, the actual averaging is being taken over X, and in the denominator, the averaging is taken over W. Remember that even though the wireless channel is constant over a single coherence interval of transmission, the channel is almost static in nature, which means that we can actually which means we can actually determine the value of the channel gain at that particular point of time. So G and H, they can be considered to be constant entities within a single coherence interval. Now the question comes is that if this is the received signal to noise ratio, then how do we maximize this to improve or to achieve the maximum achievable information rate that is possible for this particular system? As we know that this particular scenario, if we remove the averaging across the transmitted symbol X and then AWGN noise W, it is associated with a product with this quantity P by sigma square, which is the transmit signal to noise ratio, and it is multiplied with the factor norm of G Hermitian H whole square by norm G square. If we use the well-known Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, what we see that the maximum achievable SNR or signal to noise ratio, it becomes simply the product of P by sigma square, that is the transmit signal to noise ratio, into norm H square, where G is equal to alpha times H Hermitian, where alpha is a normalizing constant. So essentially what we get is that the received combining vector, it should be a linear scaling, linearly proportional to the channel gain. This is essentially the match filter receiver that we normally design for the digital communication systems. And as we know, in wireless communication, this type of receiver combiner design is very well known as maximum ratio combining. And as you can see that since there are L different and independent paths that are present in the receiver, the diversity gain that can be achieved from this particular scenario is L, which is very similar to the repetition coding that we observe, that we usually observe in the time diversity case. Similarly, if we look at the capacity of the CMOS transmission with this match filter receiver, what we observe that it is log 2 of 1 plus P by sigma square into norm H square. Analogously, if we look at the ordinary transmission with a single antenna and at the transmitter and the single antenna at the receiver, this norm H square quantity, it becomes simple as mod H square. And if the channel, if we consider an AWGN channel, this capacity expression reduces to the AWGN capacity expression for the traditional communication systems. So what we ultimately see is that in CMOS transmission, there is a gain in SNR, which is norm H square. If we look at the transmitter diversity scenario, where we can assume that there are L antennas at the transmitter, which are simultaneously transmitting data to a single antenna at the receiver, we can also design a similar transmitter system, which is known as the maximum ratio transmission, and where the transmit vector will be G into X, and G is given by H conjugate divided by norm H. So this is a transmitter diversity equivalent of the match filter receiver that we can design for the receiver diversity scenario. And the only difference is that instead of processing at the receiver, we are processing all the channel information at the transmitter, which is essentially termed as pre-processing of the data or pre-coding or beamforming. As a result, the diversity gain and the power gain are exactly same as MRC and MRT for whether it is a CMOS transmission or single input multiple output or MISO transmission multiple input single output scenario. And in both cases, the power gain is also the same, norm H square. So if we look at norm H square, it is essentially can be written as L into 1 by L into norm H square, and norm H square, which is the Euclidean norm, it can be simply written as summation over in mod square value of individual channel gain coefficients, square of the channel gain coefficients. And if we know that from the central limit using the central limit theorem, the average value, this essentially represents the average statistical average, which is 1 if we have sufficiently large number of antennas. So essentially what we see is that power gain that we achieve, whether it is a CMOS transmission or a MISO transmission, or whether it is a transmitter diversity or a receiver diversity, it depends on the number of antennas that are present at the transmitter and receiver and is equal to that number. Now that we know that whether we are placing multiple antennas and whether it is at the transmitter or at the receiver, in either case, it essentially gives us a large increase or large boost in the actual received signal power. And this boost is linearly proportional to the number of antennas. We need to see what happens if we place multiple antennas both at the transmitting and at the receiving end. Of course, if we consider the multiple antennas at either at the transmitting end or at the receiving end, this linear increase in received signal power can be translated into 3 dB with every doubling in the number of antennas. Now, let us talk about a point-to-point MIMO transmission system where we have multiple antennas at the transmitter and multiple antennas at the receiver. So in a point-to-point MIMO system, since we have multiple transmitter antennas and multiple receiver antennas, what happens is that for each of these transmit antennas, we open up multiple independent paths between the transmitter and the receiver. So if we have NT transmit antennas and NR receive antennas, the actual number of channels that are present between the transmitter and receiver becomes the product between NR and NT. So we have that many channel gain coefficients between the transmitter and receiver. And so when we talk about the channel gain between the transmitter and receiver, we present them in the form of a matrix, NR cross NT matrix. So if we want to talk about the diversity between the transmitter and receiver, we need to see how we can efficiently utilize the channel knowledge to actually compensate for the fading phenomenon that happens between the transmitter and receiver. In a point-to-point MIMO system, since we have a channel matrix, a specific operation that is carried out on the channel matrix is known as the singular value decomposition. Using this singular value decomposition, we separate the channel matrix into three parts. The middle part, the capital sigma, it essentially symbolizes the actual power gain that can be achieved between the transmitter and receiver across multiple independent channels, and the number of non-zero coefficients in this matrix is dependent on the minimum number of antennas that are present, whether it is at the transmitter or at the receiver. And all these elements that are present in this power matrix is present on the principal diagonal of this matrix. On the other hand, the matrices U and V, they are more of a they are more of a unitary matrices, which are used to characterize the actual channel. So if we want to implement a point-to-point MIMO system, it is essential that we must have channel knowledge both at the transmitter and at the receiver. And part of the channel data has to be processed before the transmission, and part of the data has to be processed after the transmission. And we very cleverly use one of the unitary matrices V as a precoding matrix at the transmitting end, and the other matrix U as the combining matrix at the receiving end. So if we see that a signal vector X has been transmitted in a point-to-point MIMO system, it essentially can be written as Y is equal to Hx plus W at the receiving end, where the channel H can be split into these three matrices U, sigma, and V Hermitian. On the other hand, X is the precoded data, which is essentially given as product of the precoding matrix V and the actual signal vector U. So this precoded data, when it combines with the received channel, it essentially becomes U sigma into X. So in this way, we have eliminated one of the unitary matrices that are present in the channel matrix. And if we want to decode the entire data, we have to multiply it with the combining matrix U Hermitian with my U Hermitian. And in this way, we remove all the uncertainty that are involved present in the unitary matrices, and the entire decoded signal will become sigma into U plus the processed noise. This essentially shows that if we are talking about a point-to-point MIMO system, essentially the channel between the transmitter and receiver can be summarized between a set of as a set of independent channels with a different power gain. So this type of transmission scenario, we call it the spatial multiplexing gain scenario. And as we have discussed before, the sigma matrix, which is essentially a diagonal matrix, it has only k components, which is the value of the spatial multiplexing gain for the point-to-point MIMO system, and k is actually the number of independent channels that is present in the system, which is the minimum of NTNR. Now that we have seen what happens between a transmitter and receiver if both of them are carrying multiple antennas, we can extend this point-to-point wireless system to a multi-user system, which is more practical for implementation or more practical for our consideration. This type of scenario, we call it a multi-user MIMO system or a multi-user MIMO channel. The only difference is that each of these users, they may have a single or multiple antennas at their end, and all these users will form a virtual receive antenna array when compared to the transmitter array. Here I have shown a simple diagram, a simple block diagram of a multi-user MIMO channel where each of the users have a single antenna and there are k users. Thus, we have a virtual receive antenna array of k antennas. And there is the transmitter which implements m antennas at the transmitting end. And since we want sufficient degrees of freedom, sufficient number of degrees of freedom for processing the data at the transmitting end, the value of m or the number of transmitting antenna is usually greater than the number of receiving antenna. Of course, in this particular type of scenario, when we are talking about multi-user MIMO channel, we do not consider any inter-user communication, which means each of the users operate independently and have a individually single stream of data that they are communicating with the transmitter. Any questions so far? If you have any questions, you can ask now so far before we proceed on to the next phase of our discussion. Okay. With this, we conclude our discussion on the first phase of our discussion, which is on wireless channel and diversity, and we have built it up to the multi-user MIMO channel. Now let us see how we actually can scale up the MIMO transmission for from the conventional small number of antennas at the transmitter or at the receiver to a large antenna system. With the advent of 5G or the fifth generation wireless communications, the scaling of MIMO or the introduction of large scale antenna system has become one of the key point of research over the past decade. And this increase in the number of antennas in a MIMO system has resulted in the massive MIMO system. The idea of massive MIMO system is to deploy a large number of antennas at the base station so as to significantly boost the receive signal so as to significantly boost the receive signal power at the transmit at the receiver or at the base station to reduce the actual transmit power required from the end users or devices, and at the same time to boost the information transmission rate. So with large number of antennas, we can support a larger data stream for processing, and the law of large numbers at the same time results to a deterministic channel power gain, which is more popularly known as the channel hardening or favorable propagation condition. Of course, with more processing, with more number of antennas, there is more processing or diversity gain that is present in a massive MIMO systems. And typically, massive MIMO system is considered to be a multi-user system, which means that even though there are hundreds of with the hundreds of base station antennas, and we can serve tens of users in the network. So as you can see in this particular diagram, there are multiple circular arrays of antennas that has been deployed in a single base station, which can serve multiple users simultaneously in the same time frequency scenario, which was a very difficult prospect if we consider the conventional traditional cellular systems, where we needed to separate the users in code space or in the frequency space. Now, if we consider the ideal massive MIMO system or the large scale system configuration, there are several ballpark design requirements that has been set for the massive MIMO systems. There is, of course, all the users are assumed to be single antenna users. So there are k single antenna users in the system. The base station will itself house m antennas, and the number of antennas has to be much greater than k, at least 8 to 10 times greater than the number of users that are present in the network or in the cell. Of course, there will be an effective uplink channel. There will be an effective downlink channel between the base station and the users. The requirement of power control is minimal to none, and the channel matrix has to be known only at the base station. This is one of the impressive factors that is considered to our advantage in massive MIMO systems. Unlike the traditional cellular systems, in this case, the base station does not need to transmit any kind of pilot signal so that the user can determine the channel. The user does not need to employ any kind of processing at all in this particular scenario. So massive MIMO system from this perspective generally prefer a time division duplexing based transmission, where the user in the beginning of the coherence interval or at some point in the coherence interval transmits training symbols, which the base station upon receiving can use to determine the channel between the base station and the user. And then the user transmits the uplink data during the uplink time slot, and the base station can use the downlink time slot for transmission of the data. And since all the uplink and downlink transmissions take place within the same coherence interval, because of the reciprocal nature of uplink and downlink channel, we can have that the uplink channel gain is same as the downlink channel gain. So whatever pilot that user can transmit in the uplink, base station can use it to figure out the channel in the downlink and use it to precode the information for the downlink transmission. Now, let us see how the massive MIMO system fares in a traditional time division duplexing transmission in the uplink. Let us consider a zero forcing receiver at the base station. Zero forcing linear equalizer or zero forcing receiver, it essentially forces all the multi-user components to zero when compared to the desired user. So if we have a channel matrix G, which is essentially H into D to the power half, where D is the diagonal matrix which lists out the power gain for different channels, which lists out the path loss coefficient for different channels, then G represents the overall channel gain between the transmitter and receiver, where H is the channel matrix that focuses on the small scale feeding coefficients, and D is the part of the channel matrix that focuses on the path loss. And since we are assuming all the channels are independent, we have a pseudo inverse of the channel matrix that is implemented for the zero forcing receiver. Since the number of antennas is at the base station vastly exceeds the number of antennas at the receiver, of course we'll have a rectangular channel matrix. So inversion of the channel matrix will require us to compute the pseudo inverse. So what we see here is that as long as we try to compute the A Hermitian G, or where A is the zero forcing receiver, we see that any linear combination between the rows and columns of these two matrices, or the inner product between the rows and columns of these matrices, will result in either 1 or 0, which means if the diversity or if the receiving combiner for one user or the ith user is combined, or if or is taken inner product with the channel vector for the kth user, it will become 0 if I and k are not the same, and it will become 1 if I and k are the same. So in this way, we are eliminating any interference that can be received from a different user. Now, since all the channels are independent, and by the law of large number, if we try to compute G Hermitian G and normalize it with the factor m, what we observe is that it essentially leads to the D matrix or the path loss matrix, which is essentially, if you remember from our discussion of point-to-point MIMO systems is the spatial multiplexing gain matrix. So G Hermitian G by M, this essentially because of a large value of M becomes the statistical average of all the fading coefficients, and it results in the value 1 because the factor M is same as the number of terms that are being considered that are being summed up for from different channels. So essentially, this entire uncertainty because of the fading, it becomes a deterministic quantity, and therefore we can say that in a traditional massive MIMO system, the channel hardening occurs, or the effect of fading completely disappears, so that the channel becomes more or less deterministic in nature. Now, if we look at the detected signal vector for this zero forcing receiver, what we observe is the receive vector R is equal to A Hermitian into Gx plus W, where A Hermitian W represents the received noise. And if we consider, instead of the entire vector, if we consider only the received signal for the kth user, it reduces to this representation of Rk, where the first term A Hermitian, AK Hermitian and Gk into xk, it represents the actual desired signal for the kth user. The intermediate summation, it represents the multi-user interference, and the last term represents the noise. And as we have already seen, AK Hermitian Gi is essentially 0. So this intermediate summation becomes 0. So we are only left with the desired signal and the noise. So essentially, with a traditional TDD massive MIMO uplink with zero forcing receiver, what we are left with is something of an equivalent to an AWGN channel with a desired received signal and a processed AWGN noise. Now, from this particular equation, we can see that the total noise power will become norm AK square, and the received signal to interference and noise ratio, or signal to noise ratio gamma k, will be given by this ratio, where the denominator term in the denominator G Hermitian G inverse k comma kth element is essentially the noise power. So if we look at the expected value of this received noise power, what we observe is that it is proportional to 1 by m by taking average across all possible values of the channel, and it essentially gives us a lower bound on the information rate achievable for the kth user in this form. And this leads to this asymptotic expression, that is, if we have very large number of antennas, then the minimum achievable information capacity of the channel will become log 2 of 1 plus m into pu, where pu is essentially the SNR, or the SNR at the transmitting end. So what we observe is that there is an m time increase in the received signal to noise ratio. This essentially says that in a massive MIMO system with perfect knowledge of the channel between the transmitter and receiver at the transmitting end, the actual asymptotic power gain that is achievable is M, which is same as in case of SIBO or MISO system. And it can be proved that with imperfect channel knowledge, that is, if we don't know the exact channel, then we can still estimate the channel between the transmitter and receiver at the base station from the training pilots, and we can still achieve a power gain which is proportional to the square root of m. Which means that if we keep on increasing the number of antennas, the actual increase in the received signal to noise ratio will be 1.5 dB with every doubling in the number of base station antennas. So If we summarize our overall discussion on the TDD massive MIMO uplink, the key takeaway point is that we can use the simple channel knowledge based combiner like zero forcing receiver or a maximum ratio combining receiver to achieve to achieve the channel capacity in asymptotically. And these linear combiners can be used with sufficiently large number of antennas, which means that with very little performance, with very little hardware, we can achieve the near capacity performance. And similar precoders like MRT or 04 receiver, 04 precoder can be also deployed for the downlink transmission in massive MIMO systems. So with this, we conclude all the necessary facts that we need to know for massive MIMO systems. However, there I have also included a few additional features that are useful for our discussion. For example, if we want to consider the power efficiency in a massive MIMO systems, we need to consider the various sources of power consumption. There is transmission power consumption. The main source of this transmission power consumptions are the power amplifiers. There is also various system power consumption parameters like antenna RF chains, local oscillators. And of course, there is rate or load dependent power consumption in the channel, which are essentially coding or decoding power consumptions or the power consumption in the backhaul channels, etc. Sorry. If we want to talk about the power amplifiers, in traditional communication system, we normally use nonlinear power amplifiers. And the reason for using nonlinear power amplifiers is usually their high gains, but at the same time, in order to reduce distortion in the received signal, we keep them operating in the linear range. So what we use is the normally linear equivalent of the power amplifiers to avoid the distortion. Essentially, this leads to very less power efficiency with a very high energy consumption. In massive MIMO systems, since we want to use multiple and more a very large scale of antenna systems and want to achieve more information rate, it is obvious that we would also want to reduce the energy consumption, or we want to use the energy more efficiently. So the solution that was suggested that we need to use nonlinear power amplifiers with higher efficiency in the massive MIMO systems. But nonlinear power amplifiers, they introduce this nonlinear distortion, which essentially results in out of band power leakage in the out of band channel. The solution that was proposed in this regard was constant envelope precoding in order to reduce peak to average power ratio of the signal, so that the amount of spill over from the in-band channel or the desired band of communication to the outside band of communication will become minimum. This will not only reduce the bleeding of energy from the desired band of communication, but also at the same time improve the actual power actual power consumption that is required for the transmission. Of course, if we want to talk about the other factors like system power consumption, which is antenna RF chain and oscillator, we need to consider the fact that since we are deploying large scale antenna arrays at the base station, it means that each of these antennas must be equipped with a individual active RF chain so as to detect the individual independent channels from the transmitter from the user end. And with more number of active RF chains, there will be a very high increase, or there will be a significant increase in power consumption. And with the increase in power consumption, eventually there will be significant decrease in energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, it essentially means that how much energy we need to pump into the channel for transmission of each bit of data. So with the increasing number, more active RH chains, the actual number or actual amount of energy that we need to pump into the channel for each bit of transmission will essentially increase, resulting in a less energy efficiency. The solution that was suggested to improve power consumption in massive MIMO system was hybrid precoding or analog digital precoding. With hybrid precoding, we can still deploy a large number of antennas, but the number of active RF chains that can be available at the base station is reduced significantly. Although, of course, it is still greater than the number of users or data streams that are being handled in the massive MIMO base stations. In this case, the precoder or the combiner is divided into two parts. The first part is the analog precoder, which is entirely made of phase shifters and directly connected with the antennas through and receive signal passes through a phase shifter network, which essentially splits the data, from those antennas into the fewer number of RF chains. And this fewer number of RF chains, they consist of a digital, they are connected to a digital precoder unit, which actually performs the conventional baseband precoding that was expected to be performed in a massive MIMO system. In this way, using hybrid precoding or analog digital beamforming, we can reduce the actual energy requirement in massive MIMO transmission while maintaining the similar level of performance. So essentially what we see that the advantage of massive MIMO system or large scale antenna system lies in its high spectral efficiency, that is the rate of increase in information rate transmission with the number of base station antennas, its high energy efficiency, which is the scaling down of the transmission power with the number of base station antennas, and thirdly, against its robustness against various hardware imperfections, which essentially means that we can implement low-cost hardware-based simple design to achieve very high level of performance. So naturally, the question comes is whether it is better, whether it is to have, whether it is more antenna, implementing more antennas is always better or not. And from the perspective of spectral efficiency and energy efficiency, it is apparent that increasing the number of antennas will keep on increasing the energy efficiency and spectral efficiency. However, if we look at the hardware imperfections, or rather the robustness of the massive MIMO system against hardware imperfection, what we see is the effect of these various hardware imperfections average out the actual number of antennas that are deployed in the system, and in the end, after a certain number of antennas, they tend to lose their effect or start to affect the system adversely. So it is not always, so in short, we can conclude that it is not always advantageous for us to deploy more number of antennas in the system if we want to implement the massive MIMO in practice. The future in massive MIMO, it features the traditional massive MIMO system, which is an improvement towards the cellular concept, which essentially means that the cellular base stations will be equipped with a massive MIMO base station, which not only increase the spectral efficiency or the energy efficiency of the entire system, but will also improve the coverage that can be available for each of the cellular base stations. And it also challenges the traditional idea of user-based channel sounding, resulting in a TDD-based transmission, resulting is a much more preferable TDD-based transmission. And since it is built with the cellular concept, it is suitable for large cells. So deployment of massive MIMO system should be more effective with micro or macro base stations. Therefore, what we can conclude is that massive MIMO system can be developed or can be implemented as a backbone towards the implementation of the next generation of fifth generation network, where it can interface multiple facets of 5G. For example, millimeter wave transmission, which can significantly improve the actual achievable performance by using hybrid recorder structure. It can also connect with device-centric architecture to integrate various smart services like edge computing or fog computing. And it can also support the native massive NTC-based communication, resulting in a grant-free and DOM access scenario. So the final question that comes is, excuse me, please turn off the mic.
Excuse me, sir. Naveen Kumar, sir.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can carry on, sir. Yes. Thank you.
So essentially, everything boils down to the question whether the massive MIMO system or the cellular massive MIMO system rather, it can do everything, or whether it lacks in some way that needs to be compensated by something else. As it turns out that the traditional massive MIMO or the cellular massive MIMO is an improvement of the traditional cellular concept. So there is still the concept of cell in a wireless network. And since there is a concept of cell, there is still cell edges that are present. And as a result, the problem of the traditional cellular communication, that is bad service at the cell edge users, is still present in a cellular massive MIMO systems. The only difference is that since we are implementing the cellular massive MIMO at larger base stations on the larger cells, the services will still be the problem with the services will not be present at smaller distance. It will only be present at a larger distance. Of course, since the cellular concept is there and the distance between base station and user is inevitably be much larger at the cell edge, the service that is available to different users in a cellular massive MIMO system is not uniform everywhere. Similarly, the edge server processing for myriads of devices at the minimal distance, at the minimum delay, will still an elusive dream in a cellular massive MIMO system. Therefore, in order to provide an ubiquitous service to everyone, the best thing that we can do is to distribute the localized communication resources from the cellular base station to the entire network area through a geographically distributed antenna system. So the main concept of cell-free massive MIMO is that it promotes a geographically distributed and interconnected network of antenna system with a centralized processing unit, which is there to improve the additional power gain and diversity gain that was achievable in a cellular massive MIMO system. So the cell-free massive MIMO is essentially the distributed counterpart of the cellular massive MIMO system. We can note that since it, instead of having a single base station, it localizes the access points to different areas of the network to make it a more of an interconnected network itself. We can consider the cell-free massive MIMO to an equivalent of the traditional network MIMO system. And in this way, the cell-free massive MIMO system can act as a coordinated multi-point transmission-based network massive MIMO equivalent of the traditional cellular network MIMO. Here I have depicted a representation of the cell-free massive MIMO system. As you can see, here we have a central processing unit which is connected through reliable network of channels to to multiple access points in the network, and each of these access points, they hold a share of the antennas of the base station that are supposed to be present in the self-read massive MIMO system. So a user, irrespective of where it is present in the network, it will always be in the vicinity of some of the access points in the some of the access points in the self-read massive MIMO system, resulting in the fact that the network service never goes out for that particular user. Now that we have a basic idea of, sorry, now that we have a basic idea of the traditional cellular massive MIMO system and the new and improved distributed self-read massive MIMO system, it is easier to see that if we want to implement edge computing at the edge computing in 5G, it is better to implement on the self-read massive MIMO system, which can provide service, uniform service to all the users that are present in the network. With this motivation in mind, let us look into the final phase of our discussion, that is edge computing enabled self-read massive MIMO system. So if we look at the communication and computation model for this particular edge computing based self-read massive MIMO scenario, the uplink transmission and the downlink transmission is significantly differed from the traditional transmission aspects that we consider in the self-read massive MIMO system. Instead of combined processing at the central server, in this case, we designate the central server as the cloud server, which is required for the offsite data processing from the end users. And at the same time, we want to equip each of these network access points with its own edge computing server, resulting in a heterogeneous hierarchical structure where we have each access point serving as a edge computing server with the central server serving as the cloud server, just like the upper two layers of the edge computing service that I have shown previously between the from the edge IoT devices to the cloud with MEC services. Now, since each of the individual users they need to upload their data to either the access point or the central server, and since the access points they are itself equipped with the edge computing servers, it makes sense to for each of these access points to process the data individually as per requirement. So in the uplink, what we have considered that even though each of these users are connected to multiple access points, they will simply broadcast their data in the uplink, and each of these access points will receive those data without actually requiring to combine them for the processing. So as long as at least one of the access points receives the data from the user completely, it is sufficient to declare that the uplink transmission has been successful. With this type of transmission scenario in mind, we can now analyze the uplink signal to power ratio for the typical user, where the receive signal at the kth base station is given by this formulation GK0 into LXK0, where GK0 is the small scale fading part of the channel and LXK0 is the path loss component, which we assume to be given by this function, which essentially means that as long as the distance between the base station and user is greater than a fixed small value d0, the path loss will be given by r to the power minus alpha, where alpha is the path loss exponent. And this essentially compensates for the fact, or accounts for the fact, that as the base station user distance decreases, the near far field effect is considered or taken into account, and the path loss and the path loss does not become infinitesimally small at a very small distance between the base station and the user. In the similar fashion, there are also other user from other users that are being received at the base station, because users are essentially broadcasting in the uplink, and their corresponding interference receive power is given by the numerator part of this equation. The downlink, we however maintain the traditional transmission scenario that is observed in the Selfie-Massimo system, except for a small change that instead of having all the antennas beamform their data to the user, we consider a user-centric scenario where a user whether a user connects to only a small subset of base stations or access points in the network, and only those connected access points will beamform the process data to the user. So for both uplink and downlink, we assume that as long as a user is in the R distance neighborhood of a access point, they will communicate with each other. So we are assuming that each area has a fixed coverage area of radius R. So any user outside that coverage area will not be communicated by that access point. And the reason for considering this type of localized or user-centric downlink transmission is that it not only just improves the power gain at the user, it is also more reliable than a single access point transmission. So what happens is that if the user decides to offload its data from the data to the access points, one of all the access points connected to the user will receive the data. And as long as one of the access points is successful in receiving the data, we can declare the uplink transmission is successful. In the uplink, either the access points or the edge servers present at the access points will process those data, or according to users' choice, the data can be offloaded, data can be actually transmitted back to the central server. So the central server will receive a copy of the received data and process it. The processed data will transmit it back to the access point, and these access points will share the data among themselves through the backhaul link, and then simultaneously transmit it back to the user. So for this particular purpose, what we have observed is that the user has the choice between an edge computing server or a cloud server for it to offload its own data. So what we assume a probabilistic model for the computation, and before that I have also shown here the receive signal to interference power ratio model here, where the receive signal is essentially the sum of the signal received from the different access points divided by the interference from the transmission to the other users. As for the computation model, we have considered a probabilistic approach towards offloading. So what we are assume in this case is that the user is definitely offloading its data to the offsite server for processing, and it offloads the entire set of data for performing any task. But it chooses with a certain probability whether it is going to offload the data to the cloud server or the central processing unit, or to the edge server or the MEC server present at the access points. So the actual computation time can be either TC, which is the computation time for the task at the cloud server or the central processing unit, or it can be TMEC, which is the processing time for the edge computing server. And what we observe is that since each user is connected to multiple access points, the user needs to choose the edge server needs to choose an edge server for processing its data. So user essentially chooses the the MEC server with minimum average load, which essentially means that TMEC is given by TMK, where K is essentially given by the minimum argument of NMK, where NMK is the average queue length of the each of the MEC servers. So essentially what we are assuming that whenever a task is offloaded to the cell-free network, each of the access point or each of the MC servers or the cloud server, it will have a long queue of data waiting at its input for processing, and these tasks will be settled in those queues, and they can be executed in a fast come first serve manner. So if we look at the service model, what we see that at the same time, multiple users are transmitting to offload their data. Now, in a practical scenario, each of the users will not be using the same type of data or will not be requiring the same type of task. So what we assume that there are multiple different types of tasks that are available at the user, and each of these tasks, they form the queue at the server. Whether it is a cloud server or the edge server, it doesn't matter. The tasks are present in a queue, and they are arranged in the order of their arrival. Of course, since there are different types of tasks, each task will have a different processing time or different processing time, and so what we so each class of task will have a different processing time. And according to our model, since we are assuming that all the access points and the users are uniformly distributed on the network, from the mathematical point of view, we assume that the queue that is present at the base station servers, whether it is access point or MEC server or at the cloud server, is a MG1 queue in nature, which essentially means that each of the server has a single processing unit. The task arrival date or the rate at which the tasks or arrive at the individual servers is exponentially distributed, or the task arrival time is exponentially distributed. The processing time is, however, has a generalized distribution. To make things simpler, we assume that since we have assumed the task arrival is Poisson distributed, we assume a exponentially distributed task processing time. And since we have multiple classes of task processing time, the overall task processing distribution, it becomes a hyper exponential distribution. With a probability based PDF for each of the class of tasks being added onto each other. Now that we have a definitive model for the computation service as well as the communication service, let us see how these communication and computation model performs in any practical scenario. So in order to analyze the performance of these communication and computation parameters, what we do is that we define two novel performance metrics that can be actually utilized to analyze their performance. The first metric that we define is to characterize the performance of communication system performance, which includes both the uplink and the downlink. So we define the successful communication probability, which accounts for both success in uplink and downlink transmissions. And it can be given by the fact that the uplink and downlink SNRs are available at the user at the access points is greater than a certain threshold values. And of course, we also have a successful computation parameter, which essentially indicates that the computation is carried out within a certain period of time. So the computation parameter is given as the probability distribution, or the cumulative distribution function of the communication time of the computation time, and the successful computation probability is given as the joint cumulative CDF of uplink and downlink SNRs. Later, in order to completely characterize the successful edge computing scenario, we define the new parameter, successful edge computing probability, which essentially characterizes or combines all three different aspects of our system: successful uplink transmission, successful downlink transmission, and successful processing of data at the edge servers. Since successful processing of the data at the edge server depends on the successful transmission, we need to consider the joint processing. We need to consider these two scenarios in a joint manner, and at the same time we can separate the successful downlink transmission, which gives us this following expression, where we can gives us the following expression for n different antenna or for n different access points connecting a single user at a time. Here lambda b denotes the density of the base stations or network access points that are present in the cell-free massive MIMO system. R represents the coverage area for individual APs, as we have pointed out before, and N represents the number of access points that are actually connected to the user at a particular point of time. So this probability T comp less than T conditioned on N, it represents the computation probability for a given number of access points connecting to the user, and at the same time the uplink transmission has been successful. So the successful uplink transmission is given by this expression, and the successful downlink transmission is given by this expression, and all their products and their individual summation over number of base stations will represent the entire successful edge computing probability. With this in mind, we finally analyze the individual edge computing parameters. First, we represent a simulation result on the successful communication probability SCMP parameter as a function of the coverage radius for each of the access point. What we observe is that in this particular scenario, we consider three different cases. We consider a fixed number of access points that are we consider a fixed number of access point density and a fixed number of antennas per access point, and we change both of these parameter values to see how the communication probability behaves over a coverage area or coverage radius for each of the AP. What I observe is that if we consider a single antenna per access point, and if we consider multiple antennas in the access point, each of these scenarios shows that there is a significant increase in the actual achievable coverage area for each AP that results in a higher successful communication probability. For example, if we look for a fixed antenna density in the cell-free massive MIMO system, if we reduce the number of antennas to 1, then we can see that the optimal coverage radius that is required for transmission, it is reached at a very small value. But if we increase the number of antennas, if we increase the number of antennas at each number of antennas that are available at each of the access points, the optimal coverage radius, it increases. This essentially means that if we deploy more number of antennas per access point, it will have more number of access point available for each of the users. And if we have more number of access points available to each of the users, it will provide the user with more options for offloading its data. And we have also compared this result to the single access point association scenarios. And what we observe is that at the optimal coverage radius, the actual successful communication probability is significantly higher when compared to the single access point association scenario. So we conclude that the more number of access points per device is there, the more better offloading capability will be achieved. The coordinated multi-point joint transmission in the downlink, although it increases the interference, and it still achieves better performance than a single transmission in a single transmission point. For example, if you see that this is the outage probability for our proposed scenario in the downlink, while this is the outage probability or the communication failure probability in the downlink if we have a single access point association scenario. And we see that even for a significantly large coverage radius, even though the downlink outage probability keeps on increasing, it still does not exceed the single access point association scenario outage probability. So what we see is that it is better to have more number of access points per device in self-massive ecosystem if we want to achieve better offloading of the data. And of course, it is also observed that the increasing number of antennas per AP has a limited effect. For example, we have considered both the 4 antennas and 8 antenna scenario here, and we see that there is marginal improvement in the 8 antenna scenario when compared to the 4 antenna scenario per access point. Next, we plot the computation probability characteristics as a function of coverage radius and the probability of offloading to the central server. And what we observe is that when the coverage radius for each access point is very small, the user should prefer to offload the data to the central server for processing. But with large number of coverage radius, the users should prefer to process their data at the edge computing servers. And this essentially makes sense because with a large coverage radius, each user will have more options available to it for offloading its task to the edge computing servers. So the actual computation processing time will be reduced. And so in short, we can summarize that the computation latency improves with MSC server cluster size, and it also decreases the load at the cloud server. With these two observations, we can now analyze the successful edge computing probability characteristics, which is essentially combining the successful computation and communication performances. And we have plotted that successful edge computing probability as a function of offloading probability to the central server and the coverage radius. And what we observe is that we can obtain a optimal value for both the coverage radius as well as the offloading probability that maximizes the successful edge computing probability. It shows that if we have a very small offloading probability for the users to offload their data to the central server, and if we have a moderate coverage radius, it is best for implementation in the self-free massive MIMO systems. Now that we have a basic understanding on how the self-free massive MIMO system should work in a edge computing enabled scenario, or how much area each of the access points in the self-free massive MIMO system should cover to have an optimal performance, we should focus on the third aspect, or we should focus on the other aspect of the 5G of the vision for 5G, or the self-message or the edge computing scenario, which is the energy efficiency scenario. So with this in mind, we devise an energy consumption model. And this energy consumption model, it considers both power consumption, both at the server for offsite processing, as well as the processing at the end user and the access points for transmission. The communication energy model, it consists of two parts: uplink transmission power and the downlink transmission power. And the uplink and downlink transmission powers, they consist of various other parameters that, like RF chain power consumption at the access point at the transmitter, local oscillator power consumption, channel coding and decoding power consumptions, and the per user transmit power, etc. On the other hand, the computation energy consumption, it consists of two parts: the computation energy power consumption at the edge servers, as well as the power consumption at the central server. And each of these power consumptions, they depend on the operating frequency of the servers at the edge, or at the MEC or edge computing, or at the cloud computing, as well as their individual average task processing time. With these energy consumption models, the overall energy consumption will be sum of these edge computing at the some of the energy consumption at the computation and the communication scenario, and we try to minimize the overall power consumption, subject to the constraint that there is a minimum desired probability of successful edge computing. So we define this following optimization problem, where we minimize the energy consumption as a function of coverage radius for each access point, as well as the probability of offloading to the central server, subject to the constraint that the successful edge computing probability is always above a certain minimum value. From this, we plot the optimum energy consumption and as a function of the minimum desired successful edge computing probability, and see how the optimum energy consumption varies as a function of this successful, or as a function of this minimum desired HCCP. The first thing that we observed, that if we consider the traditional cloud computation scenario or the cloud assisted MEC scenarios, they are both inferior to what can be achieved optimally in the edge computing enabled self-free massive MIMO systems. And we also observe that for different combinations of antenna and the access point density, the actual energy consumption that is required, the actual energy consumption, optimal energy consumption in the self-free massive MIMO system differs on a different level. For example, if we reduce the actual number of, if we keep the actual number of antenna or antenna density, actual antenna density constant, and reduce the available antennas at each of the access point, thereby increasing the access point density, there is a significant decrease in the overall optimum power consumption. And at the same time, what we observe is that with the different values of minimum desired SCCP, the actual power consumption also varies. So what we observe is that in the beginning, the energy consumption decreases with the minimum desired successful edge computing probability, but beyond a small threshold value, it increases with the successful edge computing probability. And this is expected because the higher is the value of the higher is the requirement of successful edge computing, the more will be the actual energy consumption. But the main takeaway here is that increasing the access point density for a given number of antennas, for a given antenna density, or for a smaller number of antennas per access point, actually significantly reduces the energy consumption for even when the successful edge computing probability requirement is very high. This gives us two takeaways. First, in a selfie-based hybrid edge cloud service, it is more efficient, energy efficient than the existing cloud MEC or hybrid MEC services. And the second, it is more energy efficient in selfie massive MIMO to have more access points than more number of antennas per access point in a selfie in a edge computing enabled operation. With this, I conclude today's discussion. Now I can take any questions from the audience.
Okay, so thank you so much, sir. So I request to the participants if they have any queries or questions, so they can ask now. As sir is there to give answer.
Hello.
Hello.
Has there been a max the optimization for the number of antennas to be used? See, most of the cases they go for 4 or 8 antennas for convenience.
Right.
Okay. So in fact, the easiest thing would be to use as minimum as possible. But
Right.
your recent charts which you have shown just now, plots, shows that you require more antennas to be more efficient in terms of the computing and other things. So can you just comment on that?
No. What I am showing here is that it is better to have more access points in the network instead of having more antennas per access points. It is actually the opposite. You see.
Oh, I see.
You see, in selfie massive MIMO, we are actually trying to
how do you
distribute the
increase the
antennas,
number
right?
of access points?
Yes.
That is a very expensive affair, no?
That is of course a expensive affair, but
yeah.
Ultimately each of the access points they are acting as a base. They are acting as a local base station, right? So it is same as deploying small cell, femtocells, picocells. Okay, it is ultimate. That's why I said that the selfie massive MIMO is essentially an equivalent of the network MIMO. The only difference is that in selfie massive MIMO, we consider a reliable backhaul channel between across the different access points, which is not actually present in the network in the traditional network MIMO systems.
I see.
But that is where the main difficulty in selfie massive MIMO system lies, because even though we are assuming that all the access points are interconnected with a very reliable channel, that is not a very practical assumption, right? So there have been several works that has considered relatively unreliable channels in selfie massive MIMO backhaul, and there are some results, the interesting results that have been presented and that have shown that selfie massive MIMO can work with a relatively unreliable backhaul. So ultimately, if we talk about whether we are talking about selfie massive MIMO or a network MIMO, the dense deployment scenario with a large number of local base stations or local access points, each containing a small edge server, is relatively more practical deployment case for the edge computing in 5G.
Thank you so much. It's a excellent model, plus is a very good work, and it must be very useful for all the future 5G cases.
I hope so. I sincerely hope so.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
See, 5G requires a lot of computations to be done, and specifically various methods we need to have. So the models will be very useful.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So yes, yeah, more questions from participants. Any questions? So yes, Sudarshan sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. So I think, sir, yeah, no more questions. So it's already 12, I think. Yes, any participants? Yeah, if they want to say anything regarding this session, or if they want to ask any questions regarding this topic, so they can ask. Okay, sir. So I think no questions from them. So yes, yes. So Sudarshan sir.
Yes.
So, sir, I thank Dr. Sudarshan Mukherjee, sir, for this valuable and wonderful talk on its computing in 5G technology. So, during this presentation, sir already discussed about the concept of space diversity techniques and MIMO and how the edge computing will work on 5G technology along with massive MIMO. So, this session was greatly understandable and will be helpful for the participants who are working in the domain of massive MIMO. So I wish that the session will be greatly benefited to the participants. And thanks once again, sir, for accepting our invitation and delivering this valuable talk in our short-term course on 5G technology, sir.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasant experience.
Yes.
I hope
So- Yes, sir.
I hope that we can do some more collaborations like this in future.
Yes, sir. Sure, sir. Sure, sir. We'll, yeah. Sure, sir. We'll definitely carry forward that one, sir. And thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
And on behalf of Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering, Madanapalli Institute of Technology and Science, I thank our respected expert and all the participants for their valuable time. So yeah, thank you all. Thank you, sir, and thank you all the participants. So yeah, yes, sir. Sir, you can leave now, sir. Yes, sir, and all the participants also.
Thank
Okay,
you.
sir. Yeah, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. And dear participants, so our next session of day 4 will start from 2 p.m. So yeah, I request all the participants to join in time. So thank you so much. So I am going to end this session here. Thank you, everyone.